The Mayans consider it to be the end of the cycle of the sun and the moon and the stars, the galaxies. And as their cycles go, there is all sorts of things that can happen. But the end of the cycle only means the beginning of a new cycle. And that's why I'm saying it's not the end of the world. But it is, it can be the end of the world as we knew it. And it can be the beginning of the world, the beginning of a new way of life. And that's what it is. It's the beginning. It is a time when we can use this time and we can begin to look at the things that are going on in our world and think, what is going on and how can I change it? And that's what it's all about. It is looking at ourselves. You know, this song that we sing at the end says, look within. Look within, because if you want to see a change, you have to have a change in your own self. Because change won't happen out there until we've changed inside. But I want to propose to you is that you don't just change. I want to talk about transformation, because there is a difference. When you change, there's always the opportunity to go back to being the way you were. Change isn't always lasting, but a transformation. When you experience a transformation, there's no going back. You've all experienced transformation of sorts when you stepped into this teaching called Science and Mind. Because once you learn what it's really all about, there's no going back to the way you... How many of you can ever go back to your old way of being? How many of you can go back to an old way of spiritual life or religious life that you had before? You can't. Because once you have experienced this freedom that we teach, you're going to go back to living and believing that you're in bondage, that you were born sinful, that you were born inherently evil, which is really what I want to talk about today. And the reason for that is there was an article in the newspaper last week. The author said, acknowledge evil exists and then look for the good. I have no fault with that title. I can't find fault with that title, because I would be really stupid, wouldn't I, if I said there's no evil. All I have to do is to open the paper and read it. Look at the front page. You don't even have to get past the front page to realize that there is something that we call evil going on in this world. So I acknowledge that there is evil, and I look for the good, and the reason I look for the good is that I know that there is good in every person, even the most evil person. I know there is good in that person if we look close enough. If we can stop condemning enough to look, we'll find some good, and it is the good that we want to nurture. What I do find fault with in his article is this. We don't become evil by what we do, but because of who we are. We are human beings, not God. We are not basically good, as some claim. We are imperfect and fall far short of any true standard of perfection. I believe we were born inherently divine. We were born divine. All we like sheep have gone astray. This is the problem. Not that we were born evil, not that we are not basically good, but that we have gone astray. We were born divine. You look at a tiny baby, and you look at that baby and you think, how can you say that this baby is not good? A baby doesn't know the difference between good and evil. The baby just is. We were all born like that. But as we grow up, we begin to forget that we are the divine in the flesh. We forget. This week, people all over the world are celebrating the birth of a man who did not forget. He was nurtured to remember his divine goodness. And this is where we have gone astray. We have forgotten who we are, and our parents have forgotten who they are, and so we do not nurture that divine goodness. We were sitting at the breakfast table when Rod read that article, and he says, you really need to read this article. And so I did. And I could feel the hackles on my neck go up. And he says, okay, Reverend Gail. What do you say to this? What's your answer to this? My answer to this is, there are three reasons. There are three reasons. First reason is the physical. There is a part of our brains, it's called the limbic brain. This is a primitive brain, and it's the seat of the emotions. It's the seat of value judgments. It's the seat of the subconscious, and it is not mature. It does not know how to make a value judgment, actually. It does not know how to stop doing. When it gets angry, when the person gets angry, if the limbic brain is driving that person, it cannot control its emotions. And if it gets jealous, it flies off the handle. If it gets angry, whatever is happening in that person's life, the limbic brain, if it's not matured, it has not matured, and the person has not learned how to control his emotions. And the other part of this is that we all have a neocortex, which is the newer brain. That is the brain that has begun to mature. And it is the brain that allows us to learn how to speak. It is the brain that gives rise to consciousness. It is the brain that can control our behavior and our emotions. If we are driven by the limbic brain, then we have not learned how to control our emotions. If we are driven by the neocortex, then we are learning how to control our emotions and to make value judgments for the good. So we are driven either by the limbic brain or by the neocortex brain, if we let our brains drive us. One of the things that we're learning is that we don't have to let our brains drive us, because there's another part of us. It is the spiritual part that learns the value, that learns the good and bad. It is the spiritual part that is inherently divine and knows it. If we have developed our spiritual part of ourselves, we know that we are divine. Ernest Holmes says, evil is not the ultimate reality. This man says it is. Ernest Holmes says, evil is an experience of the soul on its journey toward the ultimate reality, and that's reality with an uppercase R. It is our soul's journey, and the evil and good are experiences of the soul. And as we learn who we are, truly are, as we learn that we are inherently divine, we were all born divine, we've just forgotten it. Like sheep, we've gone astray. But when we begin to get a glimmer of our divinity, then we can make choices that our soul will experience good rather than evil. That we will know that there is the ultimate good in every person. We are quick to jump to judgment of someone who does the deeds of Sandy Hook last week. I believe we are all divine, but I also believe that we all are just this close to doing the same thing. But we have learned the difference, and we have learned how to control our emotions and our behavior. But it is not because we have overcome evil. It is because we recognize the divine in every person. And even in that person, there is a spark of the divine that needs to be nourished. And when we nourish the divine in every person, and if we could start at a young age to nourish the divine, things like that won't happen. And that's our chance for transformation. not just of ourselves, but of the world. That we can recognize that there is divine in every person, and we nourish it, we nurture it. We don't condemn, we love, and we nurture that person back to their wholeness. And this is the way that we can train our brains, and so that we are not driven by our brains, but we are driven by our souls. We are driven, our behavior becomes soul-driven rather than brain-driven. When we recognize that we are all the divine in action. We are the activity of God. When we recognize that, then we become soul-driven rather than brain-driven. And the third is fractal time. Our Earth has been on an orbit that is moving us further and further away from the core of our galaxy. And as we move further and further away from our core, now I want you to listen to this carefully, because it's a metaphor as well as a physical fact. As we are moving further and further away from the core of our galaxy, we're moving into a time of darkness. Meaning things are not the way we would like them. And it is because of the Earth's orbit and the tilt and the wobble of the Earth that we are experiencing the climate changes that we've been experiencing. We're experiencing natural disasters that we haven't had. I mean, we're having more and more of them, or we have been having more and more of them. Tsunamis, earthquakes, hurricanes, in places that have never or not in a long time. And the reason for all of this is the Earth is moving away from its core, and so it's experiencing unusual behavior. The metaphor is this: as we move away from our spiritual core, which is our divineness, we experience darkness. And the further we get from our core, the more darkness we experience. And you can define darkness however you want to define it. And so when we move away from our core, we experience all sorts of upheaval in our own lives. Spiritually, we experience them when we move away from our divine self. But as we begin to move closer to that core, then we begin to come into the light again, and we begin to experience our divine birthright, which is that we are free from all of the things that so many of us experience. Once we begin to realize we are the divine in the flesh, we are spirit walking around, and spirit is perfect, whole, and complete. We don't have to live in poverty. We don't have to live a life of disease. We don't have to live a life of loneliness, or whatever it is that dark period of our life has caused us to be in. We can live as people of the light. We can live as people who know their own divinity. So I invite you this Christmas season, this season that we sing about goodwill toward all men, I invite you to experience that wholeness within yourself. And as you experience that wholeness within yourself, it will filter out to every person you meet. It can't help but move out into the world, because when you are the light, and when you let that light shine through you, everybody's going to notice it, and it's going to have a fallout effect on them. That light will shine on everybody because of the 6 degrees of separation, and the earth can be transformed. Every person on this earth can feel this light and this love as we let it be who we are, as we let it shine through us. And so I invite you to do that this season. I invite you, in the midst of all the craziness that's going to go on in the next 24 hours, and let me tell you, I know what it is, because I know it's only, what, a little over 24 hours to Christmas Day, and how many of people just get really crazy. In the midst of the craziness, if you can remember, peace, I am peace, I am love, I am joy, and just let that flood through you. Watch what happens to your life, and watch what happens to the people around you. It's just like all around you, it all settles down. And you become that center of peace and love and joy for every person. So I invite you, just experiment with it. Just have fun with it. Just let it be who you are this season. And I invite you to love and to forgive. I invite you to forgive them for your own sake. It's a purely selfish act. And I invite you to have the most wonderful holiday season ever in your life. Because that will happen when you turn to love, when you let love rule your life, when you remember that you are the divine, and the divine is love.